On this Monday night, unraveling diplomatic ties. Ottawa doubles down on criticism of Saudi Arabia's human rights record as Riyadh strikes back, recalling Saudi students from Canadian universities. Also, a damning confession from the star witness at the trial of Donald Trump's former campaign chair. Paul Manafort's longtime business partner turns against him, saying they committed crimes together, lots of them. And the race to escape Lombok. Nearly 2 days after a deadly earthquake rattles the Indonesian island, nearly 100 are confirmed dead and many more are still stranded, some of them Canadians. This is The National. The diplomatic rift between Canada and Saudi Arabia is deepening. After announcing last night that it was expelling the Canadian ambassador and freezing new trade and investment, the Saudis today expanded their sanctions to travel and thousands of Saudi students living in Canada. All of this because Canada demanded the immediate release of 2 human rights activists. Briar Stewart has the latest on this fast-moving dispute.
Canada will always stand up for human rights.
She may have been speaking at a conference on LGBTQ rights, but the questions for Chrystia Freeland this afternoon were all about the Saudi situation.
We're waiting for answers on how Saudi Arabia intends to go forward with the relationship.
A relationship that's become increasingly hostile after a tweet on Friday from Global Affairs saying that Canada is gravely concerned about additional arrests of civil society and women's rights activists in Saudi Arabia, including Samar Badawi. She's the sister of jailed human rights blogger Raif Badawi, whose wife and children live in Quebec. Canada urged Saudi authorities to immediately release them and all other peaceful human rights activists. Saudi Arabia retaliated, calling the criticism an affront to the kingdom, which requires sharp response to prevent any party from attempting to meddle with Saudi sovereignty. It said it was immediately freezing new trade with Canada and expelling the ambassador, measures that experts say are both aggressive and revealing.
Saudi Arabia has been spending quite a bit of time telling the international community that things are changing. These aggressive retaliatory moves against Canada demonstrate exactly the opposite.
Today, Saudi authorities announced that its state airline will no longer fly to Toronto. And perhaps the most widespread move, the more than 10,000 Saudi students who go to Canadian universities are being told they have to leave and go somewhere else. This professor says it will not only throw the fall semester into jeopardy for the students, but it will affect schools too.
Foreign students in this country pay a much higher tuition than Canadian citizens. And most Canadian universities rely on foreign student tuitions to add money to their budgets.
Canada says its embassy in Saudi Arabia remains open and that officials are waiting for clarification on exactly how trade will be affected and whether or not there'll be any impact on that controversial $15 billion deal for light armored vehicles. Briar Stewart, CBC News, Vancouver.
And let's pick up on a point in Briar's report. The thousands of Saudi students currently studying in Canada, this will have a big impact on them, as we heard, and the schools they pay tuition to. Saudis make up the 4th largest contingent of foreign students at Canadian universities and colleges, behind China, India, and South Korea. The Saudi Arabia Education Ministry is reportedly coming up with an urgent plan to relocate the students to other countries. Likely destinations could include the United States and the UK. The story's been generating a lot of reaction online, including one inflammatory picture posted to Twitter. Here's a photo tweeted out by a Saudi youth organization. It shows an Air Canada plane flying towards the CN Tower, what many considered a reference to the 9/11 attacks. The group has since removed this image and issued an apology. Well, there was a star turn from a star witness at Paul Manafort's trial in Virginia. Manafort was U.S. President Donald Trump's one-time campaign manager. He's accused of bank and tax fraud. Well, today, Manafort's former business partner and protege took the stand and gave some damaging testimony. Thomas Dagla has the details.
Rick Gates was once Paul Manafort's right-hand man. He could now prove to be Manafort's worst enemy, cracking open their alleged secret payment scheme for the world to see. The trouble stems from their work for Ukraine's pro-Russian government, work for which they were paid millions, funneled through shady offshore accounts, according to the witness. At Manafort's trial for tax and bank fraud, Gates has now testified the pair committed crimes together. He says they held 15 foreign bank accounts undeclared in the U.S. and hid financial information from authorities here at Manafort's own request. Suspicious deals carried out in the years before both Manafort and Gates worked for Donald Trump's election campaign. And the president still seems sympathetic to the accused, asking on Twitter last week who was treated worse, Al Capone or Paul Manafort, adding, "Where's the Russian collusion?" As Rick Gates' testimony continues, the question is whether the jury will believe him. He's already pleaded guilty to lying to the FBI in exchange for a deal with the government. And now, another admission. Gates testified that he stole hundreds of thousands of dollars from his own business partner, Manafort, a confession that will only help the defense's argument that Gates is untrustworthy. The trial isn't directly related to the Trump campaign, but it is the first public test of charges stemming from Robert Mueller's Russia investigation.
And Thomas joins us from our Washington bureau now. There was tension in the courtroom today between the judge and the prosecution.
Yeah, there's certainly no love lost between these two, Ian. After the jury left the courtroom today, the judge and the prosecutor got into a 10-minute argument, if you can imagine. The issue here is how the prosecution repeatedly brings up the billionaires in Ukraine who finance politicians there. The judge feels discussing them is a waste of time. Get on with it. It's irrelevant. He's already said stop referring to those people as oligarchs. And today there was this bizarre scene where the judge blasted the prosecutor for looking away from him, saying, it seems like you're looking down, as if to say, this is BS. His words, Ian.
Now, the prosecution's evidence today seemed pretty strong, but Manafort's legal team will be giving their side of the story later this week. And Thomas, what are you expecting from them?
Well, you can expect that Manafort's lawyer is going to be hammering home how Gates has been caught lying before. So why should the jury believe him now? Evidence in this trial today would suggest both Manafort and Gates broke the law and hid their tracks. So who's less trustworthy between the two? That is the question for the jury, Ian.
Well, you're in our Washington bureau for the next couple of weeks. I think you'll be busy. Thomas, thank you.
You're welcome.
The Trump administration is following through tonight with its pledge to reimpose trade sanctions against Iran. They had been suspended under the 2015 nuclear agreement. This move is deepening a divide between the United States and some of its significant allies. The move follows Trump's withdrawal from the 2015 agreement. The goal is to get Iran back to the table to negotiate a new nuclear deal with the United States. Under the executive order, Iran will be prohibited from using U.S. dollars. The sanctions will also affect Iran's automotive sector and trade in metals. There have been days of angry demonstrations in Iran, the country's economy already weakened by decades of sanctions. Just in the last year, Iran's currency lost about 80% of its value. The Iranian president responding to Trump's move, saying if America wants to negotiate, it should remove the sanctions.
The more united we are, the sooner we will make the United States sorry, and we can shatter sanctions. It is in our own hands.
The UK, France, and Germany have expressed deep regret at the U.S. move. We are learning more about that powerful earthquake that struck Indonesia this weekend. Damage is widespread. At least 98 people have been killed. And in a moment, we'll hear from a Canadian family with a heart-wrenching story of their own. The magnitude 6.9 quake hit Sunday evening, centered on the island of Lombok, a popular tourist destination known for pristine beaches and island charm. But tonight, rescuers continue to look for victims in the rubble of buildings that collapsed. And there is chaos as thousands of visitors scramble to get home. The CBC's Katie Simpson has the latest.
Rescue teams are handpicking through the rubble looking for survivors, but authorities fear they will only find more victims in the thousands of homes that are now completely destroyed. Hardest hit is Lombok, a popular resort island full of summer tourists.
Everyone started running to the hills, everyone followed each other, and then we slept on the mountain until morning.
It was early evening when the earthquake struck, with tremors so strong they were felt on the neighboring island of Bali. sending panicked shoppers running for mall exits. Most of the victims were killed by collapsed buildings, said a spokesman for the National Disaster Mitigation Agency. Thousands of tourists are ending their vacations early, causing lineups at the airport and on the beach. Thousands of people are waiting for rescue boats to take them back to the mainland.
We've just been in another earthquake.
Canadians are among those stuck.
Our kids were in the room beside us, so we immediately ran to the kids and grabbed them and just ran.
Jennifer Montgomery Lay says this is a bucket list trip. Her daughter has cancer, and the British Columbia family is using this time to bond. She says surviving the earthquake has taught her new lessons in compassion.
The hotel that we're staying in, 16 staff members have completely lost everything, their homes, everything. And they actually, most of them are here today with us to be helping us, so it's very humbling.
Repairs and rebuilding will begin as quickly as possible, but with this kind of damage, a return to normal is a long way off. Katie Simpson, CBC News, London.
Well, CBC meteorologist and seismologist Johanna Wagstaff is here in Vancouver. And Joe, I know you've been following this earthquake story closely. Let's begin with a bit of context on this particular quake.
Right. Well, magnitude 6.9, Ian, is a significant magnitude, and at a depth of 31 kilometers, this is considered a shallow earthquake, so less time for those seismic waves to weaken before they hit the surface. And this is an area where structures are vulnerable to shaking, made out of concrete and tinder blocks, which is why we've seen so much damage. However, the epicenter hit at a fairly rural part of the island, so some of those cities that rescue crews are still trying to get to, some of those villages are smaller than 1,000 people in population, so that may hopefully help keep that death toll down in the end. To put it into context, though, an earthquake of similar size and depth actually struck southwest of Seattle back in 2001, and that led to about $4 billion in damage. And this is exactly the kind of size and depth earthquake that we're worried about here in Vancouver or Victoria. Well,
and speaking of worry, I imagine what the people in Indonesia are going through, because it was just a few days ago they had, in the same area, a magnitude 6.4 quake.
That's right, and that 6.4 was actually a foreshock or a precursor to this event. We don't always get early indicators, and we never know at the time if this is a warning or the event itself. In this case, that was an indicator that the larger one was still to come, and now we're seeing aftershocks. So the ground continues to shake for those people, probably for days and if not weeks to come. But this is a very seismically active area of the world. Two tectonic plates are converging together. In the past decade, we've seen at least 6 events of similar size lead to deaths in the area. Ian.
Thanks, Johanna.
You're welcome.
Well, to some of the other developing stories we're tracking tonight, including the latest out of Venezuela. Authorities say they're making progress in the investigation into Saturday's alleged assassination attempt on the president, Nicolas Maduro. Government sympathizers rallied today in support of Maduro. Authorities say they have identified the masterminds of the attack, which is said to have involved drones armed with explosives. That announcement followed news yesterday that 6 people had been arrested. Maduro has blamed the attack on far-right elements and the president of Colombia, though he offered no evidence for the claim. Steamy, sticky weather continues to blanket much of the country. Heat warnings are now in effect across Canada, with every province except Manitoba covered by at least one. In some areas, humidex levels are forecast to climb into the low 40s. Environment Canada says many people in this country can expect above average temperatures to linger through most of this month. The sprawling blaze in Northern California has now grown into the second largest wildfire ever recorded in the state's history. Officials say the Mendocino complex fire is now scorching more than 1,100 square kilometers, an area nearly the size of Los Angeles. Right now it's about 30% contained, and it is just one of 17 major wildfires burning across the state. The situation has become so severe that yesterday the president declared a major disaster in California, and that move makes it easier for people affected to get access to federal aid. And in British Columbia, more than 24 hours after wildfire forced them to leave their homes behind, residents of Telegraph Creek in the northern part of the province still don't know when they'll be able to return. The evacuation order was issued yesterday afternoon to around 300 people after a nearby fire grew to 40 square kilometers in size. In BC's southern interior, favorable weather conditions overnight kept the province's largest wildfire from growing significantly, but a change in wind direction today made for very smoky skies in Karamias and the Costin areas. Anita Bath has the latest.
In the distance, the Snowy Mountain wildfire burns on the hillside. Normally, large plumes of smoke can be seen from kilometers away, but today, the whole sky is a haze.
You really feel it too after a while. For a long ride, you start to feel it in your chest. And I'm old, 60 years old, so you know, it goes a long ways with the air quality out here like this. It gets pretty poor.
Despite the air quality, Rob Carter is braving the outdoors.
It's a nice day for a ride, always.
Carter lives in this mobile home park for residents 55 and older.
90% of them guys are all indoors on days like today.
Today is the smokiest day this year in the region.
You keep the windows shut, you know. If it's not, then you open the windows or whatever. Last year the smoke was 10 times as worse, and there are floods, and a lot of them just need to see what's going on.
So for now, they brave the poor air quality.
I just hope and pray that they do get the fire out.
But that looks to be a long way off.
In terms of the long-term forecast, it does look like this fire may be on the landscape for quite some time. Our role with the BC Wildfire Service is ensuring that it stays away from community, values, and infrastructure during that time.
Helicopters are working around the clock, scooping up water from the Similkameen River. The steep terrain does not make this wildfire easy to fight, so dozens of homes remain on evacuation order. More help is on the way, though, with crews expected to arrive from Australia, New Zealand, and Mexico later this week. The hope is they will give our firefighters a much-needed reprieve. Anita Bath, CBC News, Costin.
Still ahead on the National, a Saskatchewan farmer has a warning for others after losing 2 dogs to a toxic chemical. And we'll have an up-close look as a group of Inuit teens learn the ropes of search and rescue from the Canadian Coast Guard. And Canadian cities are under pressure to reduce the deadly risks for pedestrians and cyclists. Find out how New York City is saving lives.
The last time New York City streets were this safe, people were getting around with a horse and buggy.
In this long summer of gun violence in Toronto, a lot of people have been asking government leaders to do something. Well, today the city's mayor released a letter he sent to the Prime Minister asking for a handgun ban in Toronto. But as Jacqueline Hansen tells us, that's raising some significant questions, including just how effective a citywide ban would be.
A string of recent gun violence in Toronto has the mayor asking for a ban on possession and use of handguns in the city. He sent a letter to the Prime Minister asking for help.
Nothing is easy, you know, when it comes to things you have to do to try and keep a city safe. But to me, I think it's feasible because everything is if you make the effort.
But the reality is there are already severe restrictions on handguns in Canada. In most situations, it's illegal to carry them, raising the question just how effective the proposed ban would be.
They're outside their proverbial swim lane in suggesting that they can do this unilaterally. Calling upon the Prime Minister or the federal government to take more action is perfectly legitimate.
Former Justice Minister Peter MacKay says Tory's letter is more about optics than practicality and argues it's aimed at the wrong people.
Banning firearms is only going to affect legitimate, law-abiding people.
This professor who studies the impact of gun violence on communities and youth says gun control is part of a comprehensive solution, but it comes with challenges.
You're never going to completely restrict the flow of firearms into the hands of criminals. And Canada has the additional pressure of also bordering the United States and several states along the border that have much looser gun laws in comparison.
Handguns were involved in nearly 60% of homicides in 2016, according to Statistics Canada. For this community advocate, numbers like that show the roots of the city's gun problems run deep.
focusing on gun violence is almost focusing on the symptom when the real problem is lack of unemployment, concentrated poverty.
Paul Bailey says the mayor's focus on a ban and preventing repeat gun offenders from receiving bail is the wrong approach.
We hear the mayor really pushing this piece around bail conditions, bail conditions, bail conditions. You're not going to police your way or lock your way up out of this issue.
The Prime Minister didn't take any questions at an event in BC today or respond publicly to the mayor's letter, but his office said it is open to all options for keeping communities safe. Jacqueline Hansen, CBC News, Toronto.
This was a holiday for many of you across the country, but even on a long weekend, farmers often need to stand guard. On the prairies, small pests can wipe out cash crops, but a major line of defense is causing collateral damage and leaving some families in grief. Olivia Stefanovic looks at that conflict and why it may come to a head.
Even during playtime, Kyle McClintock and Erica Shermans keep a close eye on their dog Hercules.
Just more about being extra vigilant, you know, we want to be able to monitor who comes in and out of the yard.
Cameras bring a sense of comfort, but they won't help ease the feeling of loss.
So this is where we buried Vlad, which was the little pup that died first here on our property.
2 of their dogs died after someone placed a highly poisonous product on their acreage.
I think one of the hardest things for us was the 2-year-old Hazel that was in the yard. And she was playing with the dogs, and like 2-year-olds do, they put things in their mouth they shouldn't, and you're on a farm. I just can't imagine if it had been a kid. That would just been like horrific.
Tests confirmed it was strychnine, a chemical banned in most places. It's only used in Saskatchewan and Alberta, where it's used to control ground squirrels like gophers.
The poison does not do what it's supposed to do.
This wildlife researcher says too many animals are dying because of it.
We're just destroying our wildlife communities, and we're losing our predators.
Health Canada is looking into whether it should ban the use of strychnine targeting gophers, but farmers who use the product say there's no effective alternative. Jim Hipkins' hayfields are littered with gopher holes.
Then here's a colony.
A colony?
Well, see, 1, 2, 3, 4 holes.
He says his only solution is this liquid.
And it's a pretty pink color.
A concentration of 2% strychnine that he can buy from his rural municipality for $10.
We want it to remain the same or even be a tiny bit more potent.
For McClintock and Shermans, nothing can bring their dogs back, but they hope their story serves as a warning to other pet owners. Be aware of strychnine's lethal consequences. Olivia Stefanovic, CBC News, Indian Head, Saskatchewan.
Coming up on The National, they trained with the Canadian Coast Guard ahead of the opening of the first ever rescue station in the north. But it wasn't just the teens who learned from the experience. And how New York got down to business and cut the death toll on its streets. There are lessons here for Canada.
We could fix Queens Boulevard if we could bring it from, the boulevard of death to a place where people want to walk and want to bike, then really nothing is impossible.
Vancouver investigating the city's third pedestrian death.
Another pedestrian is being hit in Burnaby.
Toronto police have arrested the driver they say struck a pedestrian.
The city of Montreal has been the scene of some deadly collisions.
These are dangerous times for pedestrians and cyclists in Canada. Our rush to get around is taking a deadly toll. Some cities are fighting back with Vision Zero. That's a concept developed in Sweden that's supposed to put safety ahead of every other concern, but critics say most have not embraced the level of change needed to make that work. So we went looking for potential solutions, and we found them in a big, bustling metropolis. New York City has dramatically cut the death toll on its streets. The CBC's Stephen D'Souza found out what they're doing right.
New York knows a thing or two about congestion. With more than 8.5 million people, there's a constant crush of pedestrians, cyclists, and cars. But here's the thing. While many North American cities are seeing a rise in pedestrian and cycling deaths, New York is bucking the trend. It's seen a remarkable turnaround in the last 4 years, and it didn't happen by accident. So how did they do it? New York officials went all in on Vision Zero, and they're getting results. Let's break down what New York did by looking at 5 major changes, beginning with road redesign. This is Queens Boulevard, once known as the Boulevard of Death because of the number of cyclists and pedestrians killed or injured here. Since it's redesigned, though, it's become the poster child for Vision Zero because that number of deaths has gone down to 0. Lanes here were narrowed, and traffic flow was at times redirected. Bike lanes were also installed, but in the center, away from parked cars and buses. Crosswalks were also shortened by widening the medians.
It's a walking city. You don't need a car in order to have, a really active life here.
Julia Kite is with New York City's Department of Transportation.
If we could fix Queens Boulevard, if we could bring it from, the Boulevard of Death to a place where people want to walk and want to bike, then really nothing is impossible. And that's really
She says the key to making Vision Zero a success is operating with the actual goal of 0 deaths.
There's no reason to accept as just the cost of doing business or the status quo, the fact that people are going to get hit and killed or injured in traffic. It's a way of realizing that we can engineer out the consequences of human error. And while we can never completely eliminate people making mistakes, we can make sure that those mistakes don't have catastrophic consequences.
Take the engineering behind crosswalks like this. The priority is the safety of those on foot. Pedestrians get the green light first and a head start on turning cars. Another major part of road redesign here is an emphasis on bike lanes. Cycling is a major piece of New York's success. A quick look at their bike share program tells the story. With the number of cyclists dramatically increasing in recent years, the city has had to work to make space for them. But officials say there's no one magic bullet. It's a combination of things, and that includes traffic enforcement. The city increased the number of traffic tickets issued by nearly 40%. Does that make a difference? CBC crunched the numbers and discovered that in Toronto, as the number of traffic tickets declined, the number of cyclist and pedestrian fatalities increased. A major part of Vision Zero here is also controlling speed. Default speed limits were reduced to 25 miles per hour, or about 40 kilometers, and they put in more oversight. One of the tools to control speed are these cameras, which can be found in school zones across the city. Now, the data shows that they've cut speeding during school hours by more than half, and injuries have gone down too.
The evidence shows that even just the difference between being hit at 30 miles per hour versus being hit at 25 miles per hour makes a tremendous difference in a pedestrian's odds of surviving.
But despite the success, the speed cameras went dark this summer, the victim of a battle between lawmakers. A sign that the kind of change needed for Vision Zero takes a lot of political will. Bill de Blasio, the mayor of New York, campaigned on Vision Zero.
When we lowered the speed limit, a lot of people said the sky would fall. Well, it didn't. Most New Yorkers recognized it was making people safer. And I certainly heard the grumbling from a lot of drivers, and I respect that. But I also heard a lot of people, including drivers, say, you know what? I don't love it, but it works.
Projects like this don't always go smoothly. There's usually opposition, and New York is no different in that respect. But because of the political will behind Vision Zero, work like this often goes ahead anyway. New Yorkers have also had to learn that they may not all get their way. Headlines reflect a recent battle over the elimination of parking for bike lanes. When the community board voted against bike lanes, the mayor stepped in and overruled them. A small win, says safety advocates like Evan Weiss.
These bike lanes are tiny slivers in a city that's just crisscrossed with parkways, expressways, parking lots, parking garages, everything.
Evan Weiss writes a cycling blog. He says part of the challenge of making Vision Zero work is bringing voices of change together.
The silent majority of people everywhere want to be safe. They want to get around without being run over. And the hard part is getting people together to help push the changes that will make that happen.
But constructing change comes with a price, and New Yorkers have had to pony up. For all its success and flaws, Evan Weiss says New York can offer a vision of what's possible.
It takes somebody to open your eyes to how far we have to go and how much better things can be and how much effort that actually takes to kind of turn that switch on in people and say, I'm going to do something about it.
Make no mistake, Vision Zero is very much a work in progress here. It's hotly debated and always controversial, but the results speak for themselves.
The last time New York City streets were this safe, people were getting around with a horse and buggy. So in the entire era of the automobile, we're at the safest point we've ever been.
Of course, drivers, pedestrians, and cyclists will always have strong opinions. The difference in New York City, they're not letting that get in the way, and they're not standing still.
As the death toll has increased for Toronto pedestrians, so has the pressure on politicians.
Any death on Toronto streets is absolutely unacceptable. No one should lose their lives in this way.
Last month, the City Council approved an additional $21 million to beef up some Vision Zero initiatives, including one that's worked in New York. Remember how pedestrians and cyclists get a head start to cross the street? Toronto will now roll that out at 80 intersections identified as being potentially more hazardous. Time now for a preview of a special CBC short doc that we'll be bringing you on Friday night on The National. The story of a mother coming to grips with the death of her 3 children, each shot and killed in separate incidents over a 12-year period. Here's a preview of Walk Good.
As a parent, you intend to love hard. They grow in your stomach for 9 months. You give birth to them. You love them, you care for them, you teach them, you nurse them, you guide them. And I've done that with all 3 of my children. Only to have other people take them away from me.
Tonight on The National, at least 2 people are dead after a major explosion on a highway in northern Italy. A tanker ran up the back of another truck stopped in heavy traffic on a bridge. The fire then spread to a car park below, and that sparked a second, more powerful blast as several more vehicles exploded. More than 60 people were injured. Another crash caught on camera, this time in Toronto. Dashcam footage shows a white vehicle slamming into a pickup truck Saturday night on the 401, the impact sending debris flying. Incredibly, 2 people who were inside the truck and that man pushed into the guardrail suffered only minor injuries. Demi Lovato has checked out of hospital 2 weeks after an apparent overdose. U.S. media is reporting the singer was discharged over the weekend and has now entered a rehab facility. The 25-year-old broke her silence yesterday on Instagram, saying she now needs time to heal and to focus on her sobriety and the road to recovery. After a 60-year career, actor Robert Redford has confirmed he is retiring. The 81-year-old Oscar winner is best known for films such as Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid and Out of Africa. He's told Entertainment Weekly his upcoming film will be his last. He says he's been doing this since he was 21, and in his words, that's enough. His final movie, The Old Man and the Gun, is set to premiere at the Toronto Film Festival. Here's a question for those of you with babies and toddlers. Who changes the diapers? The answer has motivated a Montreal area father to take on one of Canada's largest restaurant chains. As Jayla Bernstein found out, he's not the first dad to argue that companies need to respond to changing roles.
When Chris Webb recently visited this Tim Hortons for lunch, he didn't know he'd end up leaving with a mission.
We went to use the change table in the men's washroom to discover that there wasn't one, and on asking where there was that we could change him, we were told to use the women's washrooms.
It's something that happens to Webb all the time, and he doesn't understand why, in 2018, restaurants haven't figured out that it's not just women who change diapers.
My wife changes diapers all the time at home, and she doesn't necessarily want to do it when we go out. But the number of times they come back from the washroom to change him, and I'm like, here you go. Like, no diaper changing facilities here.
Webb took to Twitter and asked Tim Hortons to do something about it. "Hey, Tim Hortons," he wrote, "I'm shocked and humiliated to have had to use the women's bathroom to change my child in one of your restaurants today." After speaking with CBC, Webb said Tim Hortons phoned him to apologize. He said they assured him that franchise would be ordering a second changing table. Tim Hortons also issued this statement. "Obviously, as a family brand, we need to make accessible changing tables available for all of our guests. This is now standard in our new restaurant design that is rolling out across Canada." Webb isn't the only Canadian dad who's frustrated with the status quo.
I think he's doing the right thing. Absolutely. The big companies are the ones that need to step up, that need to really set the example.
Frank Emmanuel and his husband were part of a group that launched this petition 2 years ago, asking local businesses in London, Ontario to adapt.
It's not just, it's not just the gay dad thing. A lot of dads are staying home now. A lot of dads are taking parental leaves. He should have the option to change his child in a sanitary place.
Webb is glad he spoke up. He hopes things are different by the time his son, Owen, is in his shoes. Jayla Bernstein, CBC News, Montreal.
I'll get ready for a taste of action in the Arctic and a summer job that just might make you jealous. Last week, the Coast Guard opened an inshore rescue boat station on Rankin Inlet, a first for Canada's north, and the Coast Guard hired Inuit students from across the north to run it. Back in the spring, they completed their training in Ontario, and David Common was right in the middle of things.
Everyone secure? Secure. All secure.
This may well be the jackpot of summer jobs. Not just high-speed maneuvering with your Coast Guard crew training on search patterns and rescue, but high-stakes operations with military helicopters. In case one of those rescues needs more help fast.
Just like a pro.
That was amazing, Fallon. It was incredible. Not a lot of summer student jobs in Canada get to say that they had a helicopter right above them where you could almost touch it. So cool. This is a big one.
Allison Bates and Kiralee Kunilusi are firsts in a few ways. Rookies in the Coast Guard's Summer Inshore Rescue Boat program.
Stern line released. Okay, stern released.
Set to open the agency's first ever rescue station in Canada's vast north.
Keep that red buoy to your starboard side. Okay.
And the crew will be nearly all Inuit, like them. Another first.
I think I am moving forward, like as a young Indigenous woman, it means a lot to me. But it's important because I've lived in the South. I've gained these skills from the South, and I can take my knowledge from the Northern community and from the South, combine them together and use them.
Are you okay? Are you alone? We're the Canadian Coast Guard!
The intense training prepares the teams for on-water rescues and some of the most common problems they're likely to face.
I got
one
contact!
On each side.
Contact!
Remember, keep your center of gravity in the boat, too.
Okay, we're good. One.
But as much as the young Indigenous crew is learning from the instructors,
Pull. Good.
1, 2, 3.
the Coast Guard is learning from the Inuit too.
We're after a Coast Guard that reflects the Canada we serve.
Watching all the training is the Coast Guard's commissioner. For years, his and other agencies have sent Canadians from the south to help the Indigenous people in the north. And not surprisingly, the Inuit know their area better.
They know their waters. They know what it's like to live near the water. They know the risks.
The idea of accepting long-held local knowledge and empowering Inuit young people to serve their communities themselves is one Kira and Allison embrace.
I know that the governments have been working very hard on reconciliation stuff, and so having this first IRB station in the north, stationed in Rankin Inlet, it's going to be really great, and it shows that they are working towards what they had promised us. It's taking time, but this is another little step in the process of getting to good grounds.
Kira and Allison's rescues will start here, the Joint Rescue Coordination Center in Trenton, Ontario, a kind of 911 for search patrols in central Canada. When a call for help is received, the Coast Guard crew will be deployed along the vast shores of Hudson's Bay, a far cry from the relative calm of training along Lake Ontario.
It's definitely a really great experience, and knowing that we're going to be like the face that somebody sees if they're in distress.
The region they'll patrol is vast, much like the Arctic. The crew, while all Inuit, come from many communities, though none from the one they'll live in, Rankin Inlet. But Allison doesn't think that'll be an issue.
Growing up in the north, you learn how to take people in that are new.
Kira has first-hand knowledge of what it's like to be new. 6 years ago, she and her family moved from the north to the south, away from her tight-knit community of Pangnirtung and Nunavut, all the way south to Ontario.
It was quite the culture shock. I think a lot of people don't realize how much of a culture shock it is.
Was it hard?
Yes, it was most definitely hard.
What were the things that were most overwhelming about it?
I think just the way things were done differently were very different from the Arctic.
Now in her early 20s, it's been a long journey, one that's taking her back to the Arctic once again, taking her home.
We currently have 3 souls on board the helicopter and request that you act as our safety vessel. Confirm copy.
She'll be part of a tradition her ancestors have kept up for centuries, coming to the aid of each other and of foreigners. But now, for the first time, they'll be doing it with the full backing of a Northern Coast Guard station. An important step, and also a pretty cool way to spend the summer.
Good job, Alan.
David Coleman, CBC News on the Bay of Quinte in Ontario.
And here's something to note. The boating season is getting longer in the Arctic because of climate change. As those waters become more inviting, the Coast Guard says it wants to be prepared for a spike in distress calls. And here's a bit more from the Coast Guard Commissioner, Jeffrey Hutchinson.
Right now it's a tourist route, and we have a lot of people in small craft, sailboats, family-size cabin cruisers, right up to small cruise ships. That's actually the biggest risk in the Northwest Passage at the moment. We can get inshore rescue boat stations doing search and rescue. We start to take some of the risk out of the people who currently might view the Northwest Passage as an obstacle course to be conquered. It's the wrong attitude, it's the wrong approach. It's how people are going to get into trouble, and we're trying to bring the resources to be there when people need us.
Still to come on The National, our moment of the day, we'll introduce you to an 89-year-old, that's right, 89, great-grandmother who crossed another daring adventure off her bucket list today.
Loved it. Every second. Every second. Just too fast. I would enjoy more of these cruises a little bit slower.
You can feel the G-forces?
Oh yeah, you can feel the G-forces. Yeah.
Force is the best.
Yeah.
Follow me. Yep, come on out here.
See you later, guys.
Last summer, Myra Hollow soared into her 88th year by jumping out of an airplane north of Toronto. She says, if you're afraid, you only live half a life. And by the time her feet touched solid ground again, she already knew what she wanted to cross off next, on her bucket list.
If I could have a chance to drive a racing car, like a Formula One, I'm a very big fan of Formula One.
You're so cool.
Well, today, Hollow got her wish at the Canadian Motorsport Hall of Fame Celebration of Speed event. Her white knuckle ride-along is our moment of the day.
Had you ever been up to 200K?
Maybe with my car.
Hollow loved to go fast. Back in the day, she says she liked to test her speedometer.
I drive all the way to the parties when nobody else was in the road. That's when I did it.
But today, it wasn't a family car on a quiet highway.
I'm ready.
Okay.
It was a Porsche Cayman S on the Grand Prix circuit. Hollow has been preparing for this day by playing a Formula One game at her son's house. And it seems to have paid off. They got up to about 220 kilometers an hour, enough to feel the G-force, and she handled it like a pro.
Absolutely calm, absolutely. I asked her a couple of times if everything was okay. She said absolutely. And I was thinking I heard faster, but I'm not sure.
Loved it. Every second.
Okay.
Every second.
This is as good as parachuting?
Different. This was more exciting, faster.
As for what her family thinks about Hollow's antics,
it's pretty cool for her doing it.
It was cool.
Hey, can I get your autograph?
Hollow says next on her bucket list, dog sledding. So keep in mind her age and her, how adventuresome she is. I was looking through her bio notes. It includes this little fact. She was the first woman on her block to wear pants. Apparently, somebody kept track of that. And in terms of taking risks, she said that once your kids are old enough that they can take care of themselves and you don't have to be concerned about the role you play to your kids, then you can start taking those risks. And as she said, life without adventure is just half a life. So all pretty impressive and an inspiring moment of the day. I always wonder, is 89 the new 59? And I guess it is. Thank you very much for watching the program here from Vancouver. That is The National. Good night.